Greetings, accounting students. Today's video is going to be about earnings per share. Earnings per what share? Per common share. So hopefully what we learned in Accounting 102 was the following: that if you take the net income and subtract out preferred dividends, if any, you would then divide that by the number of common shares outstanding. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that because we're supposed to use the weighted average common shares outstanding, for which I have created this acronym WACSO. So here's a little example. Let's suppose we started the year with 300,000 common shares outstanding, and then we issued 30,000 shares on February 28th. So for how many months did we have 300,000 shares outstanding? For 2 of the 12, January and February, yeah? So we multiply and we get 50,000. So that's where the term weighted average comes from. So the longer that a balance is outstanding, the greater weight that it will get in this calculation. Okay, what happened next? Well, we have 330,000 shares outstanding on February 28th, and then we reacquired 12,000 shares on June 1. So we had the 330,000 shares outstanding from February 28th to June 1, which would be March, April, and May. Give that a shot of 3 over 12, 82.5. Okay. For how many months did we have 318,000 shares outstanding? Well, the next transaction is on September 1. So what do we have? We have June, July, and August. Another 3 over 12. 79.5. Okay. Then on September 1, we have a 6% stock dividend, which is obviously going to increase the number of shares outstanding. In this case, by 19,080 shares. That should be this 318 times 0.06, 19,080. Yeah? Okay, now here's the problem. These number of shares here, 337,080, they've been watered down by what? By 6%. So we have to go back and retroactively restate our earlier calculations. See, these are apples over here, and these two guys here, those are oranges. So we need some more oranges. Multiply times 1.06 for each of these weighted averages. Now we have all oranges in the right-hand column. For how many months did we have 337,080 shares outstanding? For the months of September, October, and November. 3 months, give that a shot of 3 over 12. Doesn't have to be restated because what? It's already at 1.06. And then on December 1, we issue 6,600 shares to bring us with our final end-of-year balance in OS shares of 343,680. Well, for how many months was that out there? Only 1 month, only December. Multiply it times 1 over 12, and then add everything up. Yeah? And finally we get what? 337,630. That's your WACSO. So typically, if we have a weighted average common shares outstanding problem, you would not mix that in with an EPS problem because it would become overly complicated. So here we go. Let's look at EPS now. Here's our generic little worksheet here. All right, so what are we doing? First of all, calculate the EPS the way we learned in Accounting 2, which is what? Take your net income, subtract your preferred dividends, and divide by the weighted average common shares outstanding. That's you're going to come to know and love as your basic EPS. Now, if this particular company you're looking at does not have any convertible preferred stock, doesn't have any convertible bonds, and doesn't have any stock options or warrants outstanding, then you are done. Okay, you have what they call a simple capital structure, which is devoid of potentially dilutive securities. And what is meant by a potentially dilutive security? It means that if the security was to be converted to common stock, it would result in a decrease in the EPS calculation. So what we are looking for here is to calculate our diluted EPS, which is, you could think of it as the worst that could happen. We're going to assume that every bad thing that could happen does happen, and what would be the result, okay? So you're saying, what bad things? Okay, well, first of all, common convertible preferred stock. If you have preferred stock that is convertible to common stock, what would the effect be if it was converted? Well, you wouldn't have the preferred dividends anymore, so you wouldn't have to be deducting them from the numerator. We'd add back the preferred dividends. What else would happen? Well, there'd be a whole bunch of common shares then, which would come into being. So you would have an increase in your numerator, which would be equal to the absence of the preferred dividends, and you'd have an increase in the denominator, which would be the number of shares which would be issued upon conversion. Now, if we assume this happens, and in that calculation it results in a decrease in EPS, then we say we have a dilutive security, and we would include it in our calculation. Okay? Convertible bonds is a little bit more complicated. Why? Because bonds have bond interest, and bond interest would be included in the determination of net income. Yeah? So what we have to do is we have to figure out, well, if the bonds go away because they converted to common stock, the bond interest will go away, but what would that be net of tax? So if we just say, like, our bond interest is $100,000 and our tax rate is 40%. So the $100,000 of bond interest expense would throw off what? 40% of that would be the tax reduction, and the net of tax would be what? 60,000. So you can easily get to that number by doing what? By taking the 100,000 and just multiplying times 1 minus the tax rate, which would be what? 0.6, and you get the number. That would be your bond interest net of tax. The bonds go away, so does the interest, so does the tax savings. 60,000 gets added to your numerator. Denominator, whatever number of shares would result from conversion. So you just multiply. Okay, stock options. All right, what's happening here? We have individuals who hold the option to purchase company shares at a certain price, the option price. Now this exercise could result in dilution. Let's see how this works. This is really make-believe. Let's say our market price of our shares is $30 and the exercise price is $20. Now what do we mean by exercise price? The holder of the options has the right to purchase shares for $20 when they're selling for $30. Obviously, great economic benefit there of $10 per share, yeah? So even if they're not exercisable at the time we're making this calculation, we're going to make this calculation anyway. Okay. All right, let's say there are 600,000 options out there. Now, if that happens, let me get rid of these guys. I don't want to go to the end of the story yet. If that happens, you're going to collect $20 for each option. Let's say each option gets you 1 share of common. The company would collect $12 million. Now we're going to assume, none of this happened, but we're going to assume that what? The company takes the $12 million and then goes out on the open market and buys as many shares as they can. So what's the net effect of all this? Well, when the options are exercised, you have 600,000 shares coming into being. And when we go out on the open market, we're able to buy back 400,000 shares. The net effect, the net effect is an increase of 200,000 shares. There is no numerator adjustment. Doesn't have anything to do with preferred dividends or bond interest. So there's a 0 in your numerator, and there's 200,000 in your denominator, which is definitely going to decrease your EPS. What's this down here? Well, here's the quick and painless method, okay? Which is shown up here. It says, what does it say? It says take the market price per share, subtract the option price per share, divide by the market's price per share, and then multiply times the number of options. Okay, so what is this? Take the market price and subtract the option price, get you $10. Divide by your market price and multiply times the number of options. Well, you can see this is 1/3, right? So what's 1/3 of 600,000? 200,000. So we can get to this number without going through all of those wacky calculations very quickly. Just take the options, make this fraction, and multiply. Okay. All right. Now let's look at some numbers, because I could talk about this till midnight. It won't help us unless we have some numbers, right? So here's some numbers. Tabita's tortellini. All right. So first things first. Do we have any dilutive securities? Of course we do, otherwise this wouldn't be any fun, this problem, right? So let's make our basic calculation first. What's our net income? It's given, 1.8 million. Subtract out preferred dividends. We got two dividends over here, yeah? We got 125,000 shares of $100 par, 2.1% convertible preferred stock. So that's going to be 125,000 times $2.10. What do we get $2.10 from? The par value times the dividend percentage, $2.10. 2.1 equals 262,500. Okay, subtract that out. Why? Again, because this money's not available to the common shareholders. Make the same calculation for letter B, which is some more preferred stock. So let's take the 200,000 and multiply times what? It says 2.2%, so let's go with $2.20. That's 2.2% of $100 par. Bingo, 440. Okay. Divide by the weighted average common shares outstanding, which is given at 1 million shares. Wax up. And we get just under $1.10 per share. Okay. Now we play the game. What if these convertible securities actually get converted? Well, if the preferred shares are converted, well, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to add the 262.5 back to the numerator because we're going to assume they've been converted, therefore there's no dividend. Yeah? Okay. How many new shares would come about as a result of this conversion? Well, let's make the calculation. It says 125,000 shares, each of which is converted into 2 shares of common stock. So that's going to be what? 125 times 2. 250,000. And if you divide, you can see that that number comes out less than this, which means, this might be a dilutive security if we throw it into the mix. All right, how many shares would be created, common shares, if the 200,000 preferred shares in letter B get converted? Well, that's 2.5 shares per common. So we multiply. I've lost control of the spreadsheet. 500,000 shares. 200,000 times 2.5 is 500,000. Comes out to 88 cents. And it looks like if we throw that into the mix, that will definitely decrease our EPS. All right, let's do the bonds. We've got to get the bond interest net of tax, right? So let's go with this. I got $12 million worth of bonds. And the interest rate is 4%. I want to take whatever that is and multiply times 1 minus the tax rate. What's the tax rate? Tax rate is 40%. So I'm going to multiply times 0.6 and I get a number. I get 288,000. The bonds go away. The bond interest net of tax goes away. But now we got new shares. How many new shares? 12,000 bonds times $30 a share, 30 shares I should say, per bond. 360,000 comes out to 80 cents. Looks like that's going to put a hurting on our EPS. Let's try letter D. What do we have? 10,800 times 4.5%. Yeah, that'll be our bond interest. Times 1 minus the tax rate, which is 0.6, equals 291.6. How many shares of common will come about? It says once again 30 shares of common stock per bond. So let's go with 10,800 bonds times 30, 324,000 new shares. It looks like that will put a hurting on this. Okay. And finally, letter E, which is the options, and we use the treasury stock method, right? So we take our market price 27, subtract 21.6, which is the exercise price, divide by the market price 27, and then multiply that fraction times the number of options. And we get a number, except I got it in the wrong cell, but I'll move it. We get a number, and the number is 60,000. Belongs over here. There's no numerator adjustment. Yeah. So this comes out to 0. Now, if you have an exercise price that's less than the market price, it's automatically going to be dilutive because your numerator is 0. Okay. So 0 divided by a number is equal to, you guessed it, 0. All right, let's take all these numbers now and figure out what our diluted EPS is. This was our basic, right? And now we want to calculate the worst that could happen, okay? So to do this, we start with the security that would be most damaging to our EPS, which would be the options. Because it's 0, all that's happening here is nothing's happening to your numerator, and your denominator is increasing by 60,000 shares. All right, now you can see my Excel spreadsheet automatically calculated. I took my 10975. Where'd that number come from? That came from over here. That's our basic number, right? 1097 divided by a million, which gets us to 1098. And now we come down here, and what did we do? We added nothing to the numerator, but we added 60,000 to the denominator. Now we're down to $1.03. We go to the second worst thing, and what would that be? Look for the lowest number, 80 cents. So we're going to go with letter C, that's the convertible bonds, and the numbers are 288 and 360. 360. That's the 80 cents we calculated before, right? Add the 288 to the numerator. Add the 360 to the denominator. Comes out to 976. So we're headed down, yeah? Now we're down to about 98 cents a share. What's the next worst thing that could happen? That would be these guys over here, the 88 cents a share, letter B. So we'll go with 440 and 500 for letter B. Plug those in over here. 500. That's the 88 cents. Add the 440 to the numerator. Add the 500 to the denominator. Now we're down to 95 cents. Okay. Which brings us to letter D. The next worst thing that could happen, which is the 90 cents. Take the 291.6 and the 324, and let's put that into this equation. $3.24. That's our 90 cents. Add the 291.6 to the numerator. Add the 324 to the denominator. We're down to 94 cents. Just a little bit over 94 cents. That's going to be our diluted EPS. You say, wait a second, what about this guy here? This $1.05. Well, when you do things in stages, worst case, second worst case, third worst, so what did we do? We did this guy first, letter C was second, letter B was third, letter D was fourth. By the time you get to this one here, that's just going to increase our calculation of diluted EPS if we throw that in. You say, I don't believe it. All right, let's put it in there. So this is 262.5, right? And the denominator is 250. Okay, so what was that? That comes out to the $1.05, yeah? Now, if we throw that in, what happens? Our numerator is increased by the absence of that preferred dividend, and our denominator is increased by the number of shares upon conversion. And what does this come out to? 95.4 cents. So that went up. And how do we feel about that number going up? We don't like it. We want the worst that could happen. So that's pretty tricky, right? Because it looks like it's going to be diluted. But then when you do this in stages, this one gets knocked out. Another thing you should consider is, well, what if I had a number like this, $1.20, in my initial calculation before I went to worst to second worst to third worst. If this number here, the individual item, is greater than this number here, you can immediately dismiss that from the calculation. That would be called an anti-dilutive security, which is much more obvious than that scenario. They're both anti-dilutive, one obviously, one not so obvious. Okay, so that would be everything that you ever wanted to know about earnings per share, but were afraid to ask.